Workplace violence is the second leading cause of death in the workplace, behind accidents. That's sobering, right? Roughly 2 million people a year claim that they have been subjected to some form of workplace violence, but the estimate is 25% of workplace violence goes unreported. And the cost of security and other services related or remediation related to workplace violence last year was estimated by SHRM to be $55 billion. On February 15, 2015, a digital subscriber to HRO Today, an HR manager in a company called Henry Pratt, was gunned down in his office trying to execute what we would consider in HR to be a routine termination. It was a reduction in force. Someone was being let go. That individual came to the session with an illegally owned handgun and killed that manager on scene and an HR intern who had been with the company all of 2 hours. Just a kid who was interested in what we do. He lost his life. So the workplace violence, there were 36 homicide-related deaths in 2000. Last year, there were over 500. This is an epidemic. So we've got a great panel. I'm going to go and just ask everyone to very quickly, introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk about this at some depth, and I want to see if we can get the audience in for some questions too. Go ahead, Jill.
Hi, my name is Jill Geimer. I'm Managing Director and Head of Human Resources for East Entria, which is the parent company of several outdoor and military supply companies, and one of them is Optics Planet. So we do have a very interesting customer base because we sell a lot of high-energy outdoor gear, which includes hunting equipment and gun accessories. And our warehouse was 5 miles down the road from the Aurora shooting, which just took place in February of 2019. 5 days prior to that, we did a restructuring and let 28 employees go, and some of them were high risk. So we were right in the throes of this unfortunate situation, and it's a true honor to be able to have this open conversation today.
Great. Ranjit?
Thank you for having me today. I'm Ranjit Tilak. I lead our product strategy and industry solutions at First Advantage. We are one of the largest background screening companies in the industry. We serve 200 countries, and majority of our customers are the Fortune 100 and 500. So workplace safety is a big deal to our customers. We are seeing a trend where pre-employment background screening is not enough anymore, and our customers are looking for tools to better manage their workforce. So I'm here to talk and see how we can introduce this concept.
Daryl?
I'm Daryl Fornado, Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, I'm Jeannie Heffernan. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Independence Health Group, which is a part of the Blue family. Locally, it's known as Independence Blue Cross.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian McClinsky. I'm co-chair of the Labor and Employment Department at Fox Rothschild. We're a national general practice law firm with 27 offices, 1,000 lawyers, and another 2,000 support staff around the country. And I chair the Labor and Employment Group.
All right, so let me get started here. So I'll direct the first question to Jill and to Jeannie. Because we talked a lot before this panel, and I'm so grateful that they've agreed to come and talk about this topic. So we'll start with Jeannie, and then we'll go to Jill, because I think you just gave us a little teaser on that story. But how have you ever been affected by workplace threats, and what policies and steps have you taken to create a safer work environment?
Sure. Yes, when you and I spoke back in the day when I was in my younger part of my career, I actually had a termination that was we knew would be very difficult from an organizational perspective, and I had security outside the room, handled the termination, went fairly smoothly. Unfortunately, the gentleman did not bring his laptop with him and left it in his car, and because he handled the termination calmly, I went to the car to retrieve the laptop, and when I was walking back across the parking lot, he came going around with his car directly at me, so I needed to dive. So that was a lesson in the fact that don't ever let your guard down when you're handling situations, and so that was a real eye-opener, and from then on we made sure that we followed through consistently with security in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the process as well in that particular scenario. In my environment today, we are very conscious about workplace safety, and we have mandatory training, hostile intruder training, so that all of our associates are prepared and ready in case of a situation. We track and monitor to make sure people have done that training, and then we also do scenario planning as well for the organization, just to make sure that we're on our toes. In addition, we did modify a lot of our security policies from an entry perspective. So we have security and we have passes to get through, but in the past, people could get through and then have free reign. That is no longer the case. We rolled that back actually at the end of 2018. And so now if a guest is coming into the building, you have to go and meet your guest, escort the guest in and back down, so that we have controls over who is in our environment.
Jill, what's your experience has been?
Yeah, the world's changed. Many of us have policies and general procedures, but I think it's really important that we all stop what we're doing and realize the game's changed, and therefore we must change, and we have to take our protective measures to the next level. So there's the event, which is the termination or any high-risk situation that you might be heading into, and then there's the precipitating events. The event itself, I tell people, it needs to be highly produced, and this isn't a conversation that people like to have. Like, producing a termination sounds very manipulative and heartless, but at the end of the day, you have your employees and yourself and all of the families associated to your employees that you're responsible for. So we plan well in advance down to, what is the meeting going to be on the calendar for this person to make sure they're there. It always has to be a surprise attack. You cannot have them walk in like they did in the Aurora shooting. He knew he was going to be terminated at 1:30. He told people in advance if he's terminated, he's going to shoot up. I mean, there were a lot of red flags that were missed. So, the employee has to think they're going into a routine meeting with their manager. And you need to spend days figuring out exactly the pathway. Where's the meeting taking place? It needs to be close to an exit. You have to have security. In our case, we notified the local police in advance. They asked us to send photos and car make, model information. And it's all, preventive. And don't think you're overreacting or being dramatic, because you can underreact in these situations and misjudge them. You need to know, who's involved in getting their personal effects. Never let them leave that pathway from the meeting to the exit. And you also don't want to have an audience of people. In that situation, they had 3 people in the room. That might be too many. You need to have, the head of HR and one other individual. That makes sense. And everybody needs to be in position. Everybody needs to be on time, and everybody needs to know what they're doing. But the reality is there's the precipitating event that I'm starting to try to really sort out so that I can come up with some sort of a document that I can share with all of you, my colleagues, because it's usually too late. If there's an actor-shooter situation, you can buy all these training programs off the shelf, but at the end of the day, they're going to give you the, run, hide, fight methodology, and they're going to tell you to check your windows and doors and, security, all those things, but that's when it's too late. So my message, really, the takeaway is we have this new world of inclusion, diversity, and acceptance, and that's all highly important, but don't get away from common sense. If somebody is acting weird, if their behavior is dramatically changed, if they make comments in the workplace, a lot of their coworkers are afraid to report that because they don't want to be, oh, I'm judgmental, or I call this person weird, and maybe they're just different. So you have to give permission to come to HR in a safe way, whether it's an 800 number, anonymous call-in, or a way to communicate. Even if it's old-fashioned, nobody wants to send an email anymore, but to put something typed up in a piece of paper to notify, create an environment where if you see something, say something, tell. Because then you need to be aware and try to prevent it beforehand, try to manage these things out before they ever reach that peak. And that's really what I'm trying to sort through right now, precipitating an event and then producing the event itself.
So let me see if I can get you some help with that. Ian, as a very well-known labor and employment attorney, I'm going to defer to you on this one. What should employers consider about policies, their employee handbooks, when dealing with workplace violence, and how should they prepare for this? And I'm going to ask you to quickly retell that story about what happened in the union environment that you had described to me, and what you had to go through with the client to prevail. But what should they think about? So maybe tell that story, and then tell them what they need to think about from a policy perspective.
So the story that Elliot's making reference to is about half of my work is in the unionized environment. And in the unionized environment, there's kind of like this mentality of not ratting on your coworker because you can have problems with the union's local, the officers, the other membership. So there seems to be a hesitancy to come forward and report behavior of coworkers that is troubling and would be on that list of behaviors you're trying to look for. And the case we were talking about is a set of circumstances where they had an employee who historically is very loud, throws things on the shop floor, acts out. And there was a dispute in the locker room one morning, and a supervisor came in to try to calm down the two bargaining unit members who were going at each other. And as the supervisor leaves the locker room, the troublesome employee blurts out, I'm going to kill that mother effer, and his family. Half of his family actually works at the company. Two of the employees, who happen to be bargaining unit employees, understood that this person's behavior was ratcheting up and becoming more problematic, and they actually came forward. The management of the company called the police to report the threat. The police came out, conducted an investigation on site, arrested the employee, charged him with making terroristic threats, and then the next day the company terminated his employment. But in the beauty of a unionized workforce, we wound up in an arbitration for 3 days over whether or not he should be entitled to get his job back, because the union's argument was that you have to put it in context. And the guy's been there 25 years, and he otherwise has an okay work record. And part of the dispute at the arbitration was the fact that the company had never really in the past documented all the other prior bad acts of acting out and throwing things at coworkers. And it made the arbitration a little difficult because you're saying, look, he's got a horrible background, but in our case, the arbitrator at least had their head screwed on straight and didn't reinstate the person. But because the union is afraid of being sued by the employee, they go through with these arbitrations sometimes where their heart really otherwise isn't. And going to the fundamental point that you made, Elliot, at the outset, is you have to develop from an HR perspective, at least as an outside counsel, and from our perspective for you, is an environment that is conducive for employees to come forward and tell you that, so-and-so is having financial problems, so-and-so is in the middle of a bad divorce, they have issues with their children, their behavior in the workplace has materially changed over a period of time. you read in the news and you hear on TV that, no one thought this was coming, but in a lot of these employee violence cases that are ratcheted down, let's say from the on-site shooting, there are telltale signs that this employee is going off the rails, but no one tells anybody. And having that open dialogue and having policies that really encourage people to come forward without retribution and some level of confidentiality is really instrumental in protecting the company in the long term.
Let me get Daryl in for just a minute. And by the way, there are often in these cases, and I've done a bunch of research on this because we did some work on it in HRO today. There are often warning signs, as Ian and the other folks, Jeannie and Joe have mentioned, but they all have one thing in common. It's always the first time that individual's been an active shooter. That's not the kind of thing that they get second and third tries at, right? So, the prevention is the key, but there's usually that level of escalation. There may be warning signs, but it's never happened before. So it's very hard. Daryl, in the healthcare environment, and you're a children's hospital, talk about an emotional topic to deal with. Do you have specific training for your staff and how to deal with and de-escalate threat? So if someone starts to escalate or show warning signs, what does your team do? Have you done training on that?
We have. Our nurses receive training on a regular basis regarding crisis intervention. We have armed security guards 24/7. Not throughout the hospital, but we allow activity through the emergency doors. So we have armed security guards there. We have a VP of quality and safety. And that VP has a safety survey that's done on an annualized basis so that we can bring about and keep out front the awareness. We conducted active shooter drills where in the last one, the shooter actually fired blanks into the basement location. And everyone in the hospital was affected. We have leadership training through Leadership Academy at Children's National. We even go so far as to, on a quarterly basis, we conduct background checks every 4 years, not quarterly, every 4 years. We conduct background checks of 25% of our workforce. And if we identify any issues or any threats, we have a comprehensive conversation with our legal department and we act immediately on what it is we find. One of the things I want to share with the group is we have to be careful of having this conversation in the context of single events. The workforce is a microcosm of our society, and the same people who live in our communities are the people who come to work. Every termination has the potential of being a bad situation. It's usually, a lot of times, not the person who's been really comfortable in dealing in a rational manner on a regular basis. It's the person to the exit point where they snap in the moment. Something went wrong. But even there, oftentimes, there are signs. What we have to do is be diligent and create a culture of awareness, not when we're concerned about the threat, but each and every day with everything that we do. I think the see something, say something scenario becomes real in the workplace. And our society, the reactions that we're getting are forcing us into an arena, not so much where we need to be afraid, but where we need to be educated and aware. Educated to the fact of, let's know what those signs are. Let's know where the exit doors are. And while it seems, it can seem monumental at times, the fact of the matter is we are at a place now where I've attended a conference where before they put speakers before us, they told us where the exit was. And it's alarming in the sense that we're not accustomed to dealing with it. But if we go home and back into our communities, the very things we see in the workplace happens in our communities every day. We just need to raise our heads up and be one of those on a regular basis.
Jeannie, you already mentioned some of the training, so I want to bounce off something Darryl said and go right to Rajiv. You talked about your organization does background checks on about 25% of the workforce on a rolling basis. So, Ranjiv, one of the most obvious steps to take is to keep potential threats out of the workforce, right? But what do you recommend to clients about, and this is a big topic, everyone's talking about background checking and ongoing monitoring. So what do you recommend about ongoing monitoring, and how has this been implemented with some of your clients? And I may go to Ian afterwards to talk about the legal implications of the various policies you talk about, because it's a little complicated, but why don't you give us the lowdown on ongoing monitoring?
I don't really like the term monitoring. Can you guys hear me? I really like the term continuous screening, right? And the difference is, whenever you talk about monitoring to your employees, they feel like they're big brother. But if you talk about them working in a safe work environment, that they are working to protect their brand, promote customer loyalty, they grasp to that. It's very much more accepting. First Advantage was called on by our customers to find a solution to this. So over the past year or so, we've been investing in our continuous screening products. And today, with the help of technology and availability of data, so all of those Twitter posts that you put out there, all the Instagram posts, it's publicly available. With the availability of data, you are now able to find out if somebody has a pending court case the next day that they commit an offense. Using, following the FCRA and the EEOC guidelines, we are able to report on some of those to you. And if some of these charges are material enough that would make an employer have a conversation with an employee, that data is now available across 50 states in our country. So criminal monitoring is a big topic. How many of you have taken Lyft or Uber to this conference? Well, believe it or not, these drivers that give you that ride are being monitored for criminal activity and driving records continuously. That's important. You've seen all the news about Lyft and Uber. You've seen the news about workplace violence. So criminal monitoring, criminal continuous screening is something that employers are adopting. The next thing is, criminal monitoring is something that has happened. The examples that we've used today is about individuals that were the first time committing a crime, right? So the availability of data on social media, believe it or not, a lot of people who are gonna do bad things, they exhibit the behavior online. Some of these people are proud about their beliefs, their behaviors, and what they say. And they're most likely, they're more prone to come and exhibit these behaviors in the workplace. So with the help of our customers and various law firms, we have an FCRA and EEOC compliant social monitoring product. Now, the data is available to you to take action on. Many of our customers talk about, okay, now that I know about this incident, what am I going to do about it? What policies do I need to implement? How do I educate my employees about what continuous screening is? So while these solutions are out there, the adoption could be challenging for some and very easy for others.
So let's take the example. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute. So you have an HR manager, and they go to an HR Today party, and they get a DUI on the way home. We don't approve of that behavior, by the way. But I need the disclaimer because Ian's here. All right, so they go and they get a DUI, but they're an HR manager. They don't really drive for the company. They're not like they're a freight driver or something like that. Should you know that if you're checking all your employees? And if you do know it, what if you take an action against that person and somehow they believe that it's linked? I mean, there are a lot of potential, potholes on the road to like an effective policy.
So what our customers have done is really going back to that handbook, okay? And the handbook and their policies. What are the things that matters to their job? What are the charges that matters to their job, right? And part of our solution, what we do, that DUI, if that was not applicable to that job, we will adjudicate it out. That alert will never go to the employer. The employer will never know about that DUI. But if it's something like murder, assault and battery,
You
right?
think those are serious,
Then
right?
they will get the flag. It's going to be a consumer report that they are able to review and determine how to take action on it.
So in that scenario, and murder would be sort of out there because the person wouldn't be coming back to work. We would certainly hope they would have been arrested and incarcerated. But there's some kind of a, severity threshold that you have in that. And any thoughts on ongoing policies related to whether we would call it screening, ongoing screening, or background ongoing monitoring, whatever?
Well, as Ranju said, as long as it's FRCA compliant and you're complying with the applicable state law of the jurisdiction you're in, I don't have any real issue with the constant monitoring. The issue from my perspective is the potential to treat people in a discriminatory manner with the information that you receive as an employee. You want to make sure that you're treating people equitably one class to another. And when you take a look at the data set that you get, you also have to make some of the determinations that you mentioned about is the data you're looking at job related, okay? But going back to, the fundamental problem is, even if you learn the information, that has happened sometime in the past, and there are a lot of personality factors that occur with employees on a day-to-day basis that, at least in my experience dealing with our clients, are better telltale signs of people having progressive problems. And from the HR perspective, your biggest expense item is your human capital. And what I have found is employers who engage their employees when they find that the person's having a problem and working with them, it normally tends to de-escalate their work problem and their behavior problem. So if we take the monitoring, and let's say the monitoring shows up that there's, the person's ranting about their divorce on social media. Sometimes you can get people into EAP programs to work with them, and when they feel that their employer is engaging them instead of ignoring them, more often than not, their behavior becomes more in line with what you would expect out of an employee.
Let me go to Jill and Jeannie. So from the perspective of HR, how do you balance an open, welcoming culture and then the need for greater security? Okay, let's talk about how we do that. So for example, we talked a little bit about see something, say something, et cetera, et cetera. Though I in my experience, in Conexa, where HR reported to me, we had one occasion where the employees were so afraid of the supervisor, they didn't actually believe the company could protect them. So that's why they didn't want to report it, okay? And that person was eventually terminated, the supervisor in question. But how do you balance that open, welcoming culture with we're going to have metal screening at the doors, right? So, Jill, you want to go first?
Yeah, I had one of those aha moments. A couple of years ago, we had to close down an office. The whole office was 130 employees, and the average tenure was about 15 to 20 years. And so it was a really difficult day, as you can imagine. So I didn't know what I was walking into, so I decided, of course, to hire security. And there were security guards throughout the building. After it was over, I stayed for a week and met with every single individual, because this is one of those severance situations where we were offboarding people in waves since it was an office closing. And I felt it was really important to, try to help them transition through outplacement and all of those services. One terminated employee came in very angry, and he just right out of the gate started yelling at me. And the irony is, what he was mad about was that there was security there, not that he was let go. And he said, I've been with this company for 27 years, you just treated me like a criminal, how dare you? And I knew that this employee had just had a recently newborn grandson. So I stopped and I said, I want to address this, but before we do, can I see a picture of your grandson? And of course, he kind of turned into grandpa mode because he was a good person, so I knew I could kind of go this route. And he showed me a picture, and I said, that is why I hired security. Because I don't know what to expect, and this is a big day, and I don't want it to get out of control. And you have a grandchild, and everyone here has families. And I watched the shade change, and he became accepting of the decision and understood it, and the rest of the meeting went well. But on the plane back to Chicago from that day, I thought, okay, this is a communication issue for me to let employees know. If you see consultants walking around, which we do annually now, we hire an outside firm to do a security threat assessment. They look at the windows, the doors, they make sure that there's secured, safe areas, but also areas with easy exits, you can get out of the building. I say, way before they show up, this is about you and your families, so we never turn on the news and the storyline is about us. So please don't be uncomfortable. Know that this is for you. And we are going to have a security guard at the front desk, and we're going to start locking down certain areas of the building. So a lot of it is just bringing it in, and I often say, one of my terms I'm known for is I always say, us, our, we. It's our company. We're in this together. It's not an us and them. A lot of these anger management issues are always like the man and, management, and I'm not being treated fairly. But I say, like, we together as a team are all responsible for going home tonight and knowing that we can have dinner with our family and feel safe, and come here and feel safe. So I think really, Elliot, it comes down to communicating and working in partnership with them. And I say, you're out in the field, please tell me what's going on. I'm not there. So it's about partnering.
All right, Jeannie, from your perspective, and Daryl, I'd like to get yours as well. What policies do you have to make it both secure and welcoming? And you're both in major metro centers too, downtown, city centers.
Absolutely. In our case, our headquarters is 45 floors, and we have over 3,000 employees in that building. And our security is outsourced to an outside firm. But we have a very strong culture in our organization, and we really act and treat each other like family. And so with the outsourcing of the security, what we've done is make sure that security is an extension of our culture, and that they are there for a reason to help protect us and so forth, but that we are open and welcoming to any of our guests that are joining us, as well as our own associates. So each and every day when our associates come in or guests come in, the security associates are, good morning, welcome, happy to have you here today, how can we help you? So it's a balancing act where they serve the purpose, but they're also representing our personality and our style, so that there's an embracing warmness to our guests coming in.
All right, and Daryl, you've got to worry about the employees, the patients, their families. So, you want to have that welcoming environment, but still maintain safety.
Yes, we do. When you're going back to corporate responsibility, we have a corporate responsibility as well as a legal one to keep our employees safe, as well as our patients. And we do background checks the same as most companies. But what we're trying to do is develop and maintain a culture of safety. Not just safety from the standpoint, from a clinical standpoint, but safety with respect to our employees every day. Now, as I shared with you, we do the background checks on every 4 years, 25% of our workforce. And we find some amazing kinds of things, and we act on. 50,000 people, visitors, walk through our doors and up and down our corridors on a monthly basis. That's a lot of people, but a lot of opportunity to do a lot of harm. In addition to all of that, we have the child molestation issues. trying to come into our hospitals, the same as all children's hospitals. Our security guards have the capacity to arrest. They have investigative tools to evaluate the merits of a situation. But the conversation we want with our employees is one that we have on a daily basis, moment to moment, about safety, about clinical safety, about this workplace safety, and we want to encourage them to participate. We have policies that relate to it, we have trainings, but the most effective part is when our employees engage with us, because the employee will see a situation go south before it actually goes. And if we can engage those employees in it, and as part of an ongoing conversation, then it's not a shock. We didn't have to go very far, very long when 9/11 occurred. And you go to the airport prior to 9/11, you can walk right up to the gate at the last minute. After 9/11, we have significant security. And while the airport and flying is a gorgeous, wonderful experience, you still have to go through security checks, and sometimes multiple checks. And it has become a way of life. And we have now a heightened sensitivity of what's happening in the airline industry. That's what we have to create in the workplace.
All right, well, I want to go to all the panelists now. I want to start with Ranjiv. You know, and you may have a few of them, but if there was one suggestion, and you're actually actively out there talking to clients about their workplace security as part of your job. So if there was one suggestion you would give the audience for a step that would make their workplace safer, but would still be compliant, what would you tell them they need to do?
I think that one of the tools that are available to you today at no cost is to do a risk assessment on your population. If you go to any of the top background screeners, whoever you use, tell them to do a risk assessment on your population. They won't disclose you the names of the individual, but at least they'll tell you, okay, you've got so many people that are doing, have committed assault and battery over the past year of employment, so that you can understand what your population is doing. And those tools are available today. You should leverage it.
All right, Ian, how about from your perspective? What would you recommend if you had one suggestion you had to make to a client to make them safer?
Create an atmosphere where your employees feel comfortable, engage them, have policies in place, and what I find somewhat disconcerting about the workplace safety issue is when you go to a movie theater and there's the trailers at the beginning, they tell you to look at the exits. You get on a plane, they tell you to look at the exits. Unless a fire marshal shows up and says, when's the last time you trained your employees on how to get to a fire exit, there's none of that. You really need to educate your employees on how to get out of a building. And you can do it either in an environment where people may believe an active shooter may be a possibility, or use it as fire preparedness as training. But I am shocked that, even in our own office, if I say to somebody, "Where's the exit?" they have no idea. And I think that that's one of the critical things that employers easily can do to help their environment from avoiding problems.
Jeannie, how about you? What would your one suggestion be?
Well, this is fairly easy because we just did it in our company and it was an aha for me. We have our ID badges, and clearly on our ID badge says Independence Blue Cross, 1901 Market Street. And so if you lose it, it tells you where to send it back if somebody picked it up. Well, they could easily come into the building, access, go do whatever. So someone picked up on the fact that we probably shouldn't be that overt. So our head of the facilities came forth just 2 weeks ago to the executive team to recommend the fact that we now blind the ID and not stipulate the fact that it's Independence Blue Cross. But yet the recommended new one had blue all over it. So anybody that lives in our environment would know this is Independence Blue Cross. So we suggested, no, just go plain vanilla white, and then have the PO boxed it for it delivered. But it was something that simple, but that could have really been problematic for us if we didn't make that switch. So there's something, just look at the things that are like every day and go, does this make sense or not? So I'd suggest that.
All right, we're running low on time. Daryl, very quickly.
Yeah, I would suggest that employees the organizations take advantage in trying to develop a culture of wellness such that employees have a healthy mental state and they know where the resources are and they're able to take advantage of them. The organization provides for that. As a preventive matter, if we can address it before it becomes an incident, we'll be in a lot better shape.
And Jill?
Yeah, rethink what constitutes wearing the title of manager. So, sometimes you have a great individual contributor, awesome at their job, and all of a sudden they become a manager. But there needs to be a gatekeeping of training from being a great employee to a leader. And part of that is introduce behavior analytics. Train your managers annually on looking for signs that are those red flags. Weird behavior, I say that term lightly, but there really is a science behind trying to do a human behavior threat assessment. It's all about prevention. It's all about speaking up and really looking at how people are behaving. Because I don't think these things just come out of nowhere. Somewhere along the line, something went very wrong.
Yeah, if I had to make one, it would be hoping for the best is not a strategy. Okay, you really need to be very vigilant and, actually have sort of a zero tolerance policy. That doesn't mean you automatically fire somebody, but that means if you get a complaint or a threat, say, that person's okay, they're just having a bad day. You got to go and do an investigation and make sure that everything's okay. We've had a great panel. Thanks so much. I want to thank, Jill Geimer from Essentria, the head of HR from Essentria, Ranjiv Tilak, the head of Vice President of Product Development from First Advantage, Daryl Varnado, the CHRO of Children's National Health System, Jeannie Heffernan, the CHRO from Independence Health Group, and Ian McClinsky, the chair of the Practice for Labor and Employment at Fox Rothschild. Big round of applause for our panel. Thank you.